Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back on another video from Broken Ronin. I think this one is going to be a very interesting discussion. Sukuna versus Meruem, the king versus the king. Now, personally, this may sound mad, I think Meruem wins this. The dude took a nuke and somehow survived that. But yeah, I'm not the power scaler here. I just like to check these out for entertainment purposes. Let's see what Broken Ronin thinks.
There are very few antagonists in anime and manga who instill the same sense of fear in their opponents as Sukuna and Meruem. As the King of Curses and King of Chimera Ants respectively, it's fair to say that both characters have much pride in their strength and ability to dominate any other creature that dares approach them. So in this video, I'll be pitting these two calamitous forces against one another. Sukuna versus Meruem, Jujutsu Kaisen versus Hunter x Hunter, King versus King, going at it in order to see who would win and why. Starting off with Meruem and his physical sets in particular, it's fair to say that similarly to Sukuna, Meruem scales to every character in his verse and
Well, yeah, like there's a point where he is the strongest person in the verse.
Beyond. Togashi does his best to make it clear just how powerful Meruem is relative to the rest of his verse, even during his infancy, and this fact shows itself in many ways, including his speed scaling. Now, there are many different ways to approach measuring speed in Hunter x Hunter, and the most conservative way to do so in this case would be to scale Meruem vaguely beyond the speed of Netero after Years of Prayer, who was stated to be able to punch faster than sound itself, and generally surpass the limitations of humanity through single-minded dedication to training. Now, it's implied that Netero has improved in regards to his speed as he's aged, specifically the speed of his prayer and nen ability, but ambiguously so, meaning that in the worst case scenario, Meruem is vaguely above the speed of sound in terms of scaling, and would actually be slightly below the Netero that he fights in this aspect. While he entirely surpassed him in every other category, the speed of Netero's movements during prayer were well beyond what Meruem could do before his evolution. If you're being a bit more generous and aren't trying to explicitly
I think if Netero wasn't as fast as he was, he would have absolutely been just knocked around.
Downplay the versus speed, you can scale Meruem over Chi-Tu quite easily, with Chi-Tu being fast enough to casually outpace bullets and garner feats that put him around 20 times the speed of sound, which is a pretty decent upgrade from the potential Meruem downplay, and quite consistent because we see characters that are even lower on the totem pole, like the Phantom Troop being able to react to sound, and Uvagin being able to catch a bullet in between his teeth. The increases don't stop here, as you can actually argue that he's even faster based on his most prominent fight in the story. During his fight with the strongest hunter, the two are able to exchange thousands of blows over the course of their fight, and being extremely generous to the nature of this exchange, you can argue that Netero and Meruem at this point are moving up to 150 times the speed of sound. Quite the far cry from the ambiguous Mach 1 downplay scale that I mentioned in the beginning of the segment. Now,
Right, okay, well, speed-wise then, Jesus, because like the speed feats in JJK, I don't think are this high. Maybe.
Now, all of these feats, statements, and calculations apply to Meruem before getting blown up by the Rose Bomb and receiving a pretty significant amp in strength and nen mastery. But the issue with trying to calculate Meruem's combat speed post-Rose is the fact that he doesn't actually fight anyone after his conflict with Netero. The closest thing to a speed feat we have from this version of the character is him being able to flash his N at the speed of light, and also being able to transform his nen into photons, which are essentially just light particles themselves. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that Meruem is capable of traveling at these speeds physically. While he does seem to be able to freely appear within the circumference of his N, movement speed on this level doesn't necessitate that his reaction speeds correlate, especially when he has no rival to force him to truly showcase the upper limits of his speed. Scaling Meruem to his N speed would be the equivalent of saying that Goku scales to instant transmission, or that all JJK characters that can create a domain with a sure hit have infinite speed because their attacks can't be dodged in a conventional sense. You could certainly make that argument if you want, but it falls apart when you critically think about it for more than a second. Generally speaking, Meruem should be anywhere from the lowballed speed of sound scaling to Mach 150, and as I always do in matchups like these, I'll be sure to go over the large range of potential speeds and how that may change the course of this battle. Similarly to his speed scaling, Meruem's durability and AP can get pretty contentious depending on who you talk to, and it has just as wide of a range, at least speculatively. On the lowest of the low ends, you can compare pre-Rose Meruem to UP and his Rage Blast, which, when calc is demonstrated to hit with enough force to level a city, or about 3 megatons worth of energy. As I mentioned before, Meruem scales above every character in the series when it comes to direct physical abilities, and this would apply to his Royal Guard as well, giving him a pretty solid baseline amount of striking power and durability to work off of. This is somewhat consistent with his scaling based on his ability to survive the explosion of the Poor Man's Rose, which had an explosive yield calculated to be around 250 megatons, which would be enough to destroy a decently sized mountain.
Right.
The important thing to note here when comparing Meruem to the Rose Bomb is acknowledging that it was able to nearly kill him from the impact of the explosion alone, and would have without the assistance of Poof and Yuppie. Despite that, Meruem's body remaining even somewhat intact upon the explosion itself is impressive.
Yeah.
So rather than say that the king scales to this explosion before his amp, you can use the Rose Bomb as a pretty solid ceiling for this version of Meruem's strength.
Oh, okay, yeah, you could use that as like, that is what is needed to nearly kill him.
And resilience. In short, Free Rose Meruem is anywhere between city level and mountain level, with the higher end attacks being enough to nearly kill him in one go. After the explosion though, Meruem's physical constitution and Nen mastery seem to get a pretty big boost, as he's able to decimate a large chunk of this rock formation with a casual rage blast that he picked up from Yuki. Calculations regarding the power of this attack vary pretty wildly, and I myself think it's absurd to say that this attack demonstrated mountain level destructive ability when it doesn't completely obliterate the formation in front of it, but let's be a bit charitable in our interpretation of this feat and call it mountain level outright. Some of the higher end calcs I've come across when researching this video came to the same conclusion, so we'll just take the highball here for the sake of generosity for the king. When allotting Meruem this generosity, we see that he's able to casually toss out mountain level blasts with the potential to do more, but unfortunately, we don't really have the available information to say exactly what the limits of his strength were after absorbing his subordinates and growing in power from it. The same thing goes for his durability at this point, but considering the increase that his output received, I'd be willing to bet that his durability when preparing to take an attack should at least be comparable to the amount of force he's able to output. Pair this domineering combination of speed, strength, and durability with his overwhelming intelligence, adaptability, and mastery of Nen, and before Sukuna stands an opponent that is certain to be different from your typical sorcerer. The full extent of Meruem's Nen abilities aren't explored due to his untimely demise, but before he passes on, we see that he can change the structure of his body to have extra eyes, wings, and potentially even limbs if his manipulation of Nen is as extensive as Poof's. We already discussed the Rage Blast ability that he obtained from Yuppie and the photonic Nen that he's capable of exuding, which allows him to become an empath with the ability to see through lies and deception, just falling short of full-on telepathy. As an offshoot of his divine intelligence and experience with Komugi, Meruem has even developed a sort of precognition in battle that allows him to analyze his opponent's habits and biases in order to formulate a plan to defeat them as swiftly and efficiently as possible.
He's a very, very clever individual.
So even if a gap between him and Sukuna actually exists, so long as they are nearly relative or Meruem is able to weather the storm of attacks, it's possible for the King of Ants to evolve in the midst of the fight and overcome his opponent through sheer tenacity, intelligence, and resilience. With all that being said, the basics of Meruem scaling have been established, but before I can talk about how I think this fight would play out, I must first go over Ryomen Sukuna and the abilities that he wields as the strongest sorcerer in history. Much like Meruem, as a result of being the strongest character in his own series, Sukuna gets the benefit of upscaling from everyone else that exists in the verse. In regards to his strength, much like Meruem, there is a wide range of options to choose from. On the low end, you can compare his Jujutsu potency to characters like Jogo, who can level massive portions of Shibuya with their casual Fire Blast, and Maxima Meteor, which has a decent area of effect. On top of this, he has his Fire Arrow feat in Shibuya, which has been calculated to be around city level in terms of strength, or just short of 40 megatons worth of TNT. Okay. As impressive as all of this is, all of these feats come from 15 Finger Sukuna alone, one that's potentially not even taking all of his fights seriously, meaning that with his full 20 fingers worth of power and a serious mindset, what he'd be able to throw out will be quite a decent bit beyond this. It's also the case that this particular form of JJK scaling is the one that would result in the least impressive feats of power. One way that I like to scale is based on characters and their domain expansion, simply because it's been stated and made clear time and time again that the internal structure of a domain and external structure are incongruent congruent with one another. Or to put it in a way that isn't as convoluted, the inside and outside aren't the same size, meaning characters like Jogo and Dagon are actually capable of creating mountain plus size landscapes with their own cursed energy, despite the outside of the barrier not even coming close to that size. This doesn't necessarily mean that characters on this level can physically punch with mountain levels of force, but it does imply that they're capable of exerting enough energy and power via cursed energy to achieve the mountain level status that I gave them earlier. Sukuna scales above these characters in both cursed energy volume and output, even when only at half of his full power, meaning that he'd also get access to this kind of strength and AP scaling. Now, like I said, this doesn't necessarily mean that every punch Sukuna throws is blowing up a mountain, but his Jujutsu, on the other hand, might be able to perform such a feat. Due to narrative implications and the relativity we see him share with Gojo, it's fair to say that Sukuna has proven himself capable of taking and dishing out damage on a similar scale to Satoru. If this is the case, this means that Sukuna would be strong enough to block Jogo's domain amped attacks with cursed energy alone, just as Gojo did, so his casual slashes being enough to damage one of the most powerful sorcerers in the series also lends credence to the idea that the domain scaling is consistent. Now, you could turn up the heat even more if you really wanted to highball the top tiers of Jujutsu Kaisen, and the way to do this would simply be to reference the volume cover's consistent claim that full power Sukuna could destroy the world as we know it. In actuality, this statement is probably just a bit of hyperbole mixed in with the potential for Sukuna to life wipe Earth, but based on certain statements and feats made clear later in the manga, it's not impossible to argue that he's actually planetary, I guess. Durability wise, it's a bit ambiguous to tell where exactly Sukuna stands, even when being more liberal with your interpretation of feats, simply because he isn't the kind of character that sustains a lot of damage in the first place. More often than not, he's so much faster than his opponent that his durability is a non-factor, and his slashing attacks don't require him to make physical contact with an opponent in order to finish them off. In the rare event that we actually do see him sustaining damage, we see that he's capable of taking as much punishment as he dishes out to Gojo, so being charitable, his resilience is probably in a similar camp as whatever you think his AP scales to. As I said before, I'll consider all interpretations of Sukuna's strength and durability when discussing who wins this fight. Unfortunately, the speed scaling for Sukuna and Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't get any less contentious, and has multiple routes available depending on how consistent you think the feats must be. If you're an anime only, skip to this timestamp where I discuss how exactly the fight between Sukuna and Meruem would go, assuming Shibuya Sukuna was the one to combat him. For manga fans, I'm sure you know how this song and dance goes. To keep it as simple as possible though, the lowest that you can scale Sukuna reasonably is Mach 3 due to a statement regarding Nao's projection sorcery speed and Sukuna's obvious superiority to characters that are superior to that. Beyond that, you could say that he's a lightning timer due to Hikari having some vague ability.
Yeah, I think Sukuna is gonna win this.
To perceive and react to Kashima's lightning bolts, and if you were to take it one step further and really drink the Kool-Aid, you'd potentially even be able to say he's relativistic to the speed of light in combat due to him dodging Kashima's EM waves. Now, I think it's quite hard to prove that he dodged the actual blast and didn't simply avoid where Kashima was aiming, so I'm not the biggest fan of arguing that Sukuna is genuinely on that tier of speed just yet. The lightning timer scaling can also be called into question based on your interpretation of Hikari's supposed avoidance in this panel, but considering that he was at least able to eject the cursed energy comprising the attack before it destroyed his brain, implies that it's viable to say that Hikari's reaction speed is on par with a stroke of lightning. Regardless, both the lightning timer and relativistic interpretations exist with moderate arguability, so expect it to be addressed towards the end of the video. But for the time being, view Mach 3, Mach 300, and the speed of light as the 3 tiers of speed that Sukuna can scale to depending on who you ask and what their demand for consistency actually is. Beyond the physical stats, we have to discuss Sukuna's hacks and abilities that'll be essential if he wants to get one over on Meruem. For starters, Sukuna obviously has Dismantle and Cleave, 2 invisible slashing type attacks that are hard, even for characters within the series to perceive and counter. With Dismantle, he's able to attack very consistently and aggressively at long range, and even combine it with his physical strikes to catch his opponents off guard. After his fight with Gojo, he's even able to amplify the potency of these slashes to ignore durability altogether by attacking not the person, but the space they inhabit itself. Think of these charged dismantles less as a slice and more like a deletion of whatever area you are currently existing in. Cleave is a little bit simpler and much less dramatic, but this ability simply allows him to adjust his slashes to the durability of whatever it is that he's attacking. Now, I wouldn't assume that he can use this technique on someone like Goku and successfully cut them, but if you're even remotely relative to him or marginally above him, a close range cleave should be enough to tear through whatever it is that you are made of. On top of these slashing attacks, he also has the fire arrow that I mentioned earlier, and this technique seems to greatly surpass the destructive ability and range of all of his other techniques if we use their relative first impressions on Maharaga's body and Kusakabe's worry about them as a sign of their potency. In tandem with his offensive abilities, he also can nullify oncoming attacks with the use of domain amplification, heal from extensive damage including his heart being ripped out of his chest, and even imbue his slashes and maybe even fire arrow with soul damaging properties as seen with Mahito. And the icing on the demonic cake here is Sukuna's domain expansion. Malevolent Shrine. In this domain, Sukuna's slashing techniques become entirely unavoidable and strengthen to 120% of their normal capabilities. And while he typically uses his domain out in the open, he's confirmed it with his own words that he can close the barrier if necessary to trap his opponents within it. I could discuss the 10 Shadows as a potential ability within his arsenal, but I mainly want to see how these two characters stack up on their own without relying on the abilities of anyone else. I also happen to be part of the Jujutsu Kaisen community, so I know that if I factor the 10 Shadows into the potential Sukuna victory, all I'm going to hear is that he was carried by the technique. In the event that Sukuna gets utterly demolished, I'll give my thoughts on how the 10 Shadows may change the course of this battle, but for the time being, we'll be throwing Sukuna to the wolves, or I guess more appropriately, to the ants with his default kit here. Just as I did with Meruem, I've now covered everything regarding Sukuna that we need to know for this fight, leaving only one question left.
Who wins?
Who wins? When comparing these two characters to see how they stack up in an actual fight, 9 times out of 10, I've realized that they are actually not going to be that far apart statistically. Lowballing both of their speed and strength stats shows us that Meruem and Sukuna would be able to move at a similar pace, and yet with a vaguely similar amount of force. Meruem's scaling to Yuppie's Rage Blast puts him at small city level, and Sukuna's Fire Arrow puts him at city level. Meruem's vague superiority to the speed of sound feat that Netero pulled off doesn't put him too far away from Sukuna, who, at the lowest of the low balls, scales vaguely above Mach 3. This is pretty interesting considering that oftentimes in versus battles like these, what gets one character a victory is the disparity in physical stats, not the character intelligence or whatever abilities that they happen to have within their arsenal. Even when not peering into the manga for Sukuna specifically, and just using things that he showed us or scales to during the Shibuya incident arc, demonstrates that he'd more than likely be able to handle Meruem before his growth, but view him after his increase in proficiency as a more worthy opponent. This fact remains true even when addressing the less conservative scaling, as both characters would have mountain level attack potency, plus being vastly superior to the speed of sound, meaning that they'll be able to deal out damage and take the hits that their opponent is dishing. The main problem for Meruem when viewing their battle solely as a contest of physical might is that he's a decent bit slower than Sukuna and less well versed in close quarters combat, but we've already seen him make up for things like this in his Netero fight, so given enough time, I actually do think that he'd be able to figure Sukuna out. I wouldn't say that Sukuna is incomparable to Meruem when it comes to his regular combat intelligence. In fact, Sukuna's experience with fighting sorcerers and curses with complex curse techniques would far outstrip Meruem's experience with fighting refined Nen hunters, but he doesn't have any feat or statement that puts him anywhere near Meruem's level of foresight and strategic ability. His numerous encounters with Komugi really did hammer a strategic mindset into his brain. Being able to seal all of Netero's options, the millions of combinations that could have been accessed, and acting upon that strategy is a feat which Jujutsu Kaisen and Sukuna specifically has seen nothing like. What this means to me is that this fight won't be won through overwhelming force, but hacks and intelligence. And in that case, while he does have the advantage in intelligence and strategy, I think chinks in Meruem's armor start to form. Due to him dying so quickly after obtaining his new Nen abilities, the extent to which he could manipulate Nen is very unknown, leaving us with mere speculation based on the few feats that he did give us. His flight and maneuverability could unfortunately be countered by Sukuna's ability to leap off of the air, his Rage Blast avoided or weakened via domain amplification, and his relativity to Sukuna becoming futile because of the invisible slashes plaguing him at every turn. Even if Meruem was able to counter these slashes or see them using N, it wouldn't actually allow for that much of a shift in outcome, because unlike in his fight against Netero, Meruem's durability wouldn't be overwhelming enough to simply weather the nigh endless swarm of attacks that Sukuna can casually dish out. Meruem also doesn't have the ability to heal or regenerate from all of the damage that he'd be sustaining either, which would make his insane foresight a moot tool in his arsenal. Even in the event that Meruem was actually able to close the gap between him and Sukuna, get in close and take a limb like he did against Netero, the fact that Sukuna heals limbs for breakfast would make all of that effort almost meaningless. Combine the harsh conditions of the battle already with Sukuna's ability to open a domain and launch the fire arrow in quick succession, and Meruem simply gets overwhelmed by the sheer variety and power that Ryomen Sukuna possesses. Even if you were to make these characters equal in their stats, or even give Meruem a speed advantage, the fact that Sukuna has already demonstrated that he can take a lot of punishment from characters with a lot of AP, regenerate, and still come back with a winning slash, demonstrates to me that Meruem would have to almost immediately overwhelm Sukuna in order to beat him outright. And discussing how Sukuna operates in the manga at full power is just overkill. More arms, more power, and stronger techniques just lead to more dying much quicker on Meruem's part, and while this may be one of the most exciting battles the King of Curses ever has, it's not quite enough to trump his calamitous power. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more like this, check out this, where I pit Yuji and Gon against one another, and subscribe for more power scaling videos like this. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.
I love that. I love when I kind of go, oh, I think this character will win, and then as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, okay, no, that, oh. The more he was going over Sukuna's feet, so I was just like, I don't know, but that was fun. That was a fun little video. I like every now and then checking out these little versus power scaling stuff. It's great. Thanks to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video and want to be able to watch Patreon-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is the last helps with channels. Greatly appreciated. Thanks for that. And if you want to see my videos early, click that join button. Become a member today. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys all next now.